Greetings and welcome to the Animal Wellness Podcast, the official podcast of Animal Wellness Action. Hi, I'm your host, Joseph Grove. On this show, we talk about animals from the perspective of people who care about them and have the ability to improve their lives by influencing culture and supporting new laws and regulations accordingly. To stay up to date with all of our news and information, subscribe to this podcast, receive our free newsletters, and more, you can visit animalwellnessaction.org. Wayne Pacelli is our founder and president. Marty Irby, executive director, are with me today. Wayne is, as I mentioned, the founder. Marty, in addition to serving as executive director, is our chief lobbyist up on the Hill. He's been very busy. I think we have an interesting show for our audience today, and it's super timely because it deals with food. And as of this recording, Thanksgiving is just over a week away. We're joined by guest Dan Buettner, who is a two-time number one New York Times bestselling author of The Blue Zone's Kitchen, who has just released a new book called The Blue Zone's American Kitchen: 100 Recipes to Live to 100. We'll get back to him in a moment. It's a beautiful book, Dan. I just got to say, I really appreciate it, and I will confess to you that I'm going to regift it. So I don't even have a toaster, Dan. I found in my closet like a bagel splitter, and I had no idea what it was. I said, "Is this for like guillotining small rodents or whatever?" So not a cook. One is on my gift list, and by golly, they're going to get the Blue Zone's American Kitchen. So thank you for helping me with my shopping list there. This is timely too because we've just posted a great deal of content about the recently concluded election. You can go back, you can read some of our endorsements for the candidates who ran. We had a very good success rate in our endorsements. Many of our candidates prevailed, and we're grateful for that. And then Wayne Pacelli has written some fairly in-depth analysis of the election. Finally, on Facebook, if you go to our Facebook page, you'll find an interview Wayne and I did just a couple of days ago about the election. He breaks down in our Facebook Live what the results mean for animals. And at this time of year, we would be remiss if we didn't ask you to consider supporting us financially. Giving Tuesday is coming up. Many people like yourself are considering how to make the world a better place with their cash as the year end approaches. We sure hope you will consider us. We run a lean machine around here. Your money goes to help animals. And if you can contribute, and better yet, consider becoming a monthly sustainer, we'd sure appreciate that. And you could rest assured that good for animals will come from it. Before we get into the meat of the show, I'm going to turn it over to Marty Irby, our executive director, for a legislative update.
Well, we've got a lot of exciting things going on. As you all know, the Big Cat Public Safety Act has been our number one priority this Congress. It passed the House back in July. It's been awaiting action in the Senate because we had 3 senators put a hold on the bill, 2 released the hold, and we're down to just 1. We believe that hold is going to be released this week. We've made an agreement with that senator, and we're hopeful that we see the Big Cat Public Safety Act head to President Biden's desk to be signed into law in the coming weeks. He has already said publicly that he will sign it. So that's the most likely bill to get done. Second is the FDA Modernization Act that repeals a 1938 mandate requiring animal testing for any drug or vaccine approved by the FDA. That legislation has passed the House in one form in a larger package, passed the Senate committee in another form, and ultimately didn't get a vote. So we were involved in what I believe to be the greatest coup I've seen on animal protection legislation, thanks to your Senator, Rand Paul from Kentucky, and Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey, who reintroduced the bill as it had been changed on September 29th. The legislation came to a vote and passed the Senate by unanimous consent with no opposition on September 29th, was delivered to the House desk, and now we're just awaiting action in the House, where it should pass by an overwhelming margin if we can get it to a vote. Our only issue right now is the committee chair, Frank Pallone from New Jersey, who's a Democrat. We need him to sign off on it, and we're working on him and wearing him down. There are a couple of other bills that we've talked about this Congress, the SAFE Act to end horse slaughter. I don't think we're going to see much action on that moving forward, but the Prevent All Soaring Tactics Act, the bill that I have bled over and worked so hard for a decade to pass, did clear the House this week. The vote wasn't as good as we wanted it to be. It was 304 to 111. And that is a little bit less of an amount of supportive members than we saw in 2019 when we passed it by 333 to 96. So unfortunately, I think the bill is losing steam. It's been kicked around for so long and people are just tired of it. They want to see soaring in, but they're tired of hearing about it. I think with that vote, we're not going to see any action in the Senate. And our hope is that in the next Congress in 2013, we're able to go back to a position where we can work on a compromise with people in the breed and the animal space to finally get something done. Other than that, there's really not a lot going. We have an appropriations package at the end of the year that we'll likely see that will fund the government for 2023. There's a chance we could see some action for an animal cruelty crimes unit, or at least funding for it at the Department of Justice we've been working on. We'll definitely see a big increase in funding for the Horse Protection Act enforcement at USDA that we've been working on for many years. And we may have an opportunity before the year's over to see some action on the Bear Protection Act / Bear Poaching Elimination Act. That's the Senate bill name that would ban the trade in bear gallbladders, that the Chinese government has been promoting this bile that comes from the gallbladders as a treatment for COVID-19 with no scientific basis. So that's where we are. We will likely get these two bills done, the Big Cat bill and the FDA bill, and are looking forward to the 118th Congress with a lot of new members and an exciting future ahead.
All right, Marty, thank you for that. Good luck on the Hill, and I appreciate that update, and I know our listeners do too. As I mentioned, our guest today is Dan Buettner. He is a National Geographic Fellow, a multiple New York Times bestselling author, and the founder of Blue Zones, an organization dedicated to creating healthy communities around the United States. His newest book is available for pre-order now and is called The Blue Zones American Kitchen, 100 Recipes to Live to 100. Dan, you'll correct me if I say any of this wrong, but Dan has identified 5 places in the world, called them Blue Zones, where people live the longest. He then distilled their longevity-enhancing commonalities into a set he calls the Power 9. It's a fascinating list, but the one that caught our attention is called Plant Slant. It tells us that among the 5 blue zones, meat is eaten only about 5 times a month on average. Usually then it's pork, and in a portion the size of a deck of cards. Once again, it seems we are reminded that helping animals, in this case by eating fewer of them, helps us all. Dan, how'd I do? Have I got it in a nutshell?
You nailed it. I almost feel like calling it a day.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone. Appreciate it. Dan, you did great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Brevity is my strength.
Yeah. So tell us what you saw in these 5 cultures relative to diet. Certainly, you mentioned that they eat much less meat than Americans do. But what about dairy, eggs, and part 2 of that question would be, what sorts of health benefits did you see as a result?
Well, it goes far beyond what I saw. I've been working on this project for 20 years with National Geographic. And the idea is only 20% of how long you live is dictated by your genes. The other 80% is something else. So we found these 5 areas where people are living about a decade longer with a fraction of the rate of chronic diseases, the diseases that foreshorten our lives. But to really get at what people ate, if you want to know what a centenarian ate to live to be 100, you can't just ask them what he's been eating lately, because 1, diets change over time, and 2, they don't remember. So to get at that, we aggregated 155 dietary surveys done in all 5 blue zones over the last 85 years. And when you average them out, you see that people are eating 80 to 100% whole food plant-based diet. Some cultures are completely plant-based. But they did eat some meat, and remember, they needed calories to survive. So it's not like Americans who have many food choices and still make the wrong choice. But they ate meat on average about 5 times per month. Very few eggs, and if it was eggs, it was from a chicken who was running outdoors his whole life. No cow's dairy, interestingly. You saw a little goat's milk and a little bit of sheep's milk, but no cow's dairy figures into the diets of longevity. The pillars of every longevity diet in the world are whole grains, corn, wheat, and rice, greens, about 70 varieties, tubers like sweet potatoes and turnips and regular potatoes, nuts, and the cornerstone, every longevity diet in the world, was beans. And we find that people who eat about a cup of beans a day live about 4 years longer than people who are getting their protein from other sources.
Wayne, this sounds very much like the message our very own Dr. Mills preaches, that by keeping animals and their products off our plate, we do good for people as well.
Well, and I think what's noteworthy about Dan's analysis, and it's fascinating, and his promotion of this has consequences for the health of us all and the health of the planet, is that it's not 100%, but it's a significant departure from the standard American diet. And I guess I just wanted to ask Dan, it's amazing that we have deviated so much from that dietary practice that you've noted. Are you seeing that your promotion of this idea in many settings is being listened to by healthcare professionals or doctors or other influencers to, change behaviors?
Yes. I've written cover stories for National Geographic, New York Times Magazine, the New England Journal of Medicine, British Journal of Medicine. They've all written Blue Zones up. So it is getting in several academic articles. But, promotion only goes so far. In Blue Zones, people are living a long time eating a plant-based diet, not because they have better discipline or a heroic sense of individual responsibility, or they have great love for animals, quite honestly. It's because they live in an environment where the cheapest, healthiest, most accessible, and most delicious foods are peasant foods, basically whole plant-based foods. And my day job for the past 13 years, I've had the privilege of working in 72 cities, not trying to change people's minds, but change their environment, changing the policies so that I don't try to work at your level, Wayne. You're at the federal level with the big boys, but I find I can get a lot done in municipal governments with a mayor and a city council that really cares about the health and well-being of their constituents rather than the business interests of their influencers. We're very successful getting somewhere between 8 and 12 policies passed at the municipal level favoring plant-based foods over junk food. And then also our teams go in and they certify restaurants, grocery stores, workplaces, school, and churches who also change their environment and policy, because it's very hard to get people to remember what to do for long enough. But when you change their environment, you can have a massive impact. And just one city, Fort Worth, Texas, they have those big stockyards there, the beef obsessed community. We managed to get the top steakhouse serving portobello mushrooms. We saw in the 5 years we worked there, the BMI, or the obesity rate, dropped 3%, and their healthcare costs went down by $250 million a year. Now, we didn't do that by convincing 1 million people to go vegan, but we did it by changing their environment so they mindlessly ate 20 or 30% less meat and replacing it by plants. And I think that's a stronger way to make a real difference than trying to beat someone over the head with what they should do, as opposed to what our environment constantly pushes us to do.
But what did those municipalities do to influence that behavior? You said you worked with the local governments. You said it was about access to whole foods. Was that the main issue? It wasn't so much inculcating this value system, but making it available to them?
Well, here's what works. The easiest way to get shown the door when you go into a city is to tell them what to do. But we have created what I call a policy bundle, or a policy menu. And we have 30 evidence-based policies that we know occasion healthier eating in that community. And we, as part of us agreeing to come into the city, the mayor and the city council and the different food interests have to sit in a room together. We take them through each of the policies and get their feedback on, number one, effectiveness, and number one, feasibility. Can you get it done in this city in 5 years? And every time after you go through all 30 of them, 8 to 12 float to the top and we get them passed. And these are simple things, like there are a lot of cities that don't let farmers markets or community gardens or people to use their front yards for gardens. All these incrementally encourage people to grow more vegetables, to change drive-through at fast food restaurants, get people eating more burgers and so forth. So we asked that, and several cities have done this, have gotten rid of the drive-through, which makes junk food a little less convenient, and therefore people are more likely to eat at home and more likely to eat healthy. So we don't look for the silver bullet, as I know you guys spend a lot of time on. We look for silver buckshot. A few dozen evidence-based nudges or defaults that we know will positively influence a community for the long run.
It seems to me that people are oddly unmotivated by the prospect of living longer. If you tell someone, my age or younger, and I think I'm representative of the age group, on this call, well, maybe we're a little bit more concerned if you tell us that we can live longer, right? Because we're at that age where physical precarity is beginning to manifest itself. But my children who are in their 20s, living 10 years longer is so far out in the distance. What kinds of arguments can be made to a younger group that perhaps isn't immediately concerned about the concept of longevity?
This has been proven. You could be biologically younger at every decade. You could be 15 or 20 years younger at every decade, depending on how you treat your body. But even that, there are very, very few people who are going to forego a cupcake at lunch because they think it's going to add 2 days of life expectancy at the end of their day. People their minds just don't work that way. We're hardwired to crave fat, sugar, salt, and rest whenever we can. So Blue Zone's work, for the most part, my books notwithstanding, we try to make permanent or semi-permanent changes to your surroundings so that your unconscious choices are architected so you mindlessly make better decisions. And we know from looking at over 50 American cities we worked in, and it's measured by Gallup, by the way, it's not anecdotal, we see it actually works, as opposed to diets, which have a shelf life. If you start a diet, after 3 months, you lose about 10% of people. After 7 months, you lose 90%. So diets, exercise programs, trying to get people to go on healthier supplements, usually a success in the short run. They're a failure for almost all the people all the time in the long run. So when it comes to longevity, unless it's something you're going to do for a long time, forget about it. It's not going to make a difference. So you need to think long term.
Mm-hmm. Another one of your 9 principles is the 80-20 rule, right? Stopping at 80% of being
full stomach.
Yeah. Right. How can the average person kind of gauge that?
Yes. So that was inspired by a Confucian adage that's very much alive in Okinawa. Okinawa is where the longest lived women on the planet have lived. And the adage is hara hachi bu, stop at 80%. But I have evolved that notion into different things you can do, evidence-based ways that you can keep from overeating. By the way, 65% of people living on this planet, it used to be, people died of starvation, and parents would tell their kids to finish their leftovers on their plate because there are children starving in China. Now, about 3/4 of the human population will die of overnutrition. So strategies to lessen the amount of food we eat. So what are a few things that work in your house? First of all, Cornell Food Lab has shown very persuasively that if you take the TV out of your kitchen or other screens, that you eat fewer calories. We tend to eat, if we're watching our TV show, we're mindlessly putting away the calories and our stomach fills up. It takes 30 minutes from the full signal travel from your belly to your brain. And by then, you've eaten 2 or 3 plates of food and you're just at the second commercial. But other things that we know work are eating breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. So trying to eat big, trying to get all your calories in about a 8 to 10 hour window otherwise called intermittent fasting, but it's done in all blue zones. And by the way, eating with your family, having your whole family sit down to a meal instead of, eating with one hand on the steering wheel and, the other hand with a burger or something in your hand. These all work very well at lessening. The other good trick is eating off a smaller plate. A 10-inch plate occasions about 20% fewer calories than eating off a 14-inch plate.
Dan, you're very devious. My God, all these little tricks. I love it. I think, looking broadly, Animal Wellness Action and the Center for Humane Economy, we're about promoting healthfulness, right? Healthfulness for people and animals, healthy communities, safer communities. When we think of safety, sometimes we think of some external threat, but obviously it just makes sense that our diet and what we put into our bodies, obviously it could be terrible foods, sugar-based foods, processed foods, factory farmed animal products, but it could be PFAS, it's chemicals. I mean, all of these things, disease afflicts all of us at some point. And you see so many people who have early onset diseases and threats. You mentioned obesity, of course, which is an epidemic in the United States and through much of the world. I just think we need to expand our definition of healthfulness and safety and think about our own choices. And in your book, your latest book here that is about to be launched, and your prior books, it's not just about diet though, it's about family, it's about recreational activities, gardening. What a health promoting activity you note that gardening is.
Yes, because it's a daily nudge to move it daily, and you emerge from the activity with fresh vegetables. But to your earlier point, according to the CDC, Center for Disease Control, CDC, their estimates put it 680,000 Americans die prematurely every year because we're eating the standard American diet, which includes about 220 pounds of meat. I mean, it's just obnoxious. Now, that's more than 500,000 people a year. We've lost way more people to our diet than we have in World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, every war combined. Yet we spent a lot of time thinking about how to treat the people who give their life for our country well, and not so much about what we could be doing to keep people alive right now. Now, the standard American diet, the way we eat it right now, with about 70% of it is processed food. And I mentioned how much meat and cheese and dairy. What I did for the Blue Zone American Kitchen is we know the pattern, the eating pattern of longevity. I worked with a researcher at NYU who found dietary studies done between 1890 and 1920. And we spent 150 hours in archives to find 4 American cultures that have eaten the same dietary pattern. And we found them among the African Americans living then, Native, Latino, and Asian Americans. They were eating essentially a whole food plant-based diet with meat as a condiment. So the purpose of writing the Blue Zone American Diet was really to propose another standard American diet as practiced by some of these immigrants and ethnicities that have been under-celebrated. And, we sort of forgotten these. And the idea is, it's really a work of anthropology to bring this diet back and bring it to life with, 100 recipes. People like recipes. We worked hard to find good ones. And then National Geographic did the photography. So I think it looks as good in your kitchen as it does on your living room table or your coffee table. But the best way to change our diet, you can say this is good for animal rights. You can say it's good for the environment. It's good for your health. As Joseph was saying, people in the moment don't care that much. I know your audience here, the people listening, I know you guys are on fire to do what's right by the animals, but most people aren't. To get most Americans to change, you need to hit them in their taste buds. You need to make that plant-based food taste more delicious than their animal-derived foods. And the main job here with this book was to curate the best ethnic expertise at making plant-based food taste good.
And John Mackey, our friend, who is the founder of Whole Foods, left recently as its CEO after more than 40 years. He told me that our palate is trained. We've trained it to like the foods that we like. And as you noted earlier, obviously we have instinctive attraction to certain foods because of our human history. But there's no reason that we can't like Whole Foods. I mean, Whole Foods to me taste fabulous, but why do we like a Twinkie or potato chips? I mean, our palate can appreciate these things, and which is what I love about your latest book is the beauty of the foods. And they are certainly as good tasting as they are beautiful. But they really are beautiful products.
Yeah, and to be fair, we're so used to napalming our taste buds, or Americans are, with meat, cheese, eggs. And in some cases, it does require sort of a cold turkey for a few days so that these nuanced flavors and textures, which you get, meat has one texture, or maybe two, but, we have mushrooms and cruciferous and carrots and beans, they all have these wonderful textures. So two things. One is to go cold turkey a little bit, but the other thing, you can achieve a flavor that competes with meat, cheese, and eggs with oil. Sorry, John Mackey. I know John Mackey's not a fan of oil, but finishing your dishes with extra virgin olive oil will ramp up the flavor. By the way, celery contains a natural sodium glutamate, sorry, a little dyslexic there, but so that'll putting celery in a dish. A lot of the dishes we have are one pot meals, but celery enhances flavors. Tomatoes add umami. We love that umami flavor. And then throwing lots of spices, especially the capsium-rich peppers, will satisfy the stimulation our palates have grown used to, and make these plant-based foods taste a lot better.
A lot of the recipes in your book, some take more time, some take less, but the idea of cooking any meal at home seems to be increasingly, vanishing, and that gets, I think, into some of the other tenets of your Power Nine, and that is, the family and loved ones and community. So it's not only a shift in palate, but there's also, I think, entailed, isn't there, a shift in just our own personal culture on some of this?
Somewhat. And before we answer that, I want to challenge your audience, and you specifically, Joseph, because you said you're going to re-gift my book. I'm going to send you another book. You can re-gift that one. But here's what I want you to think about doing. Most of the recipes in these books are one-pot meals. They take less than 20 minutes to assemble, and they'll provide about 10 servings for under $1. If you get an Instapot or a pressure cooker, you only need one thing. As long as you have a stove, an Instapot or a pressure cooker, or even a regular pot, assemble these meals. You can cook 10 meals in 20 minutes. So that's an average of 2 minutes per meal. Everybody has time for it. And what you have is this absolute gift for your microbiome, your body. It sends a message to the environment. It sends a message to animals. I think everybody can do it. But to your point, the reason people live a long time in the blue zones is not because they have great discipline or individual responsibility. To sum up the Power Nine, they're eating the way they eat, and they're moving naturally, mostly because they live in walkable communities, but about every 20 minutes, because their life is underpinned with purpose. They live in communities where the healthy choice is the easy choice. And the big one is they surround themselves with 3 to 5 people who care about them on a bad day, who idea of recreation is walking or gardening or even playing pickleball, as the case of the Adventists, or who are vegetarian or vegan, because we really end up mimicking the behaviors of people around us. So it's, once again, the reason it isn't so much of those 5 things that explain longevity, it's the interconnected, mutually supporting nature of these 5 things that keep people doing the right thing and avoiding the wrong thing for long enough so they're not developing heart disease, diabetes, avoidable cancers, and dementia.
I love that you have flipped the narrative on this, Dan, that it's not harder. It's not some enormous investment of time of chopping and shopping and doing all of these things that are time consuming, that you've reduced it with these recipes and with these principles to simple acts that are good for self-preservation, but then radiate out to help animals, help the environment, help the planet. And when we can do something selfish that also benefits others, what a perfect set of outcomes that seems to me.
That's a very easy sell, actually. Yeah, you have to lead with taste. And Wayne, one of the things I love about you and your organizations, full disclosure, you and I hiked together in Slovenia about a month ago, and I had a complete download, and I've known you for better part of a decade. But you don't lead with guilt. You're not that scolding. You're not the person who makes people feel terrible about maybe a culture they grew up with. I feel you lead with love, and you lead with showing people the benefits, whether it's showing lawmakers, well, if you do this, here's the constituents that are now going to vote for you. And your approach is so right on. So, what I try to do at the municipal level, you're doing at the federal level, and I just salute it and admire it. And I'm a supporter of yours.
Well, thank you, and that's nice of you. But I'm just so impressed with how you're just reframing how we live our daily lives. It's better for us. Self-interest is a really powerful motivator, and you've shown that self-interest doesn't have to be a horrible sacrifice. So I love what you're doing.
You mentioned that the cultures you examined weren't necessarily doing a lot of what they do dietarily for the benefit of animals. But it would seem to me that a lot of the more humane ways they live would naturally accrue to better treatment of animals. Among the 5 countries or cultures you profile, do you find that they're generally kinder to nature as well as they are even inadvertently to themselves?
Yes. They, in all 5 blue, Sardinia and Icaria, they've had a symbiotic relationship with goat and sheep, and they're all named. They're cared for every morning. I actually embedded with shepherds for a week. The sheep there are mostly used for wool and for milk. They spend their entire lives in fields with the shepherd right next to them. I've seen shepherds sleeping with their, not in a sexual way, but sleeping with their animals. So there is a symbiosis there. Some people would argue that's not right under any conditions, but we're looking here at civilizations that have lived the same way for 3,000 years, and it's been a symbiosis that have allowed both of these species to survive and thrive. And of course, we all need to evolve, but it's certainly much more humane. Since the 1970s, when the agricultural bill produced a glut of soybeans and corn, and we pulled cows out of pastures where they were eating mostly grain and living, not as bad a life. Now they're living in feedlots, the vast majority, living miserable lives. And the meat they produce is fattier. It's much lower in omega-3 fatty acids and higher in inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids. So the direction we're going here in America, the first good step might be to, go back to the way farmers farmed a long time ago. And, eventually, I like to think of, getting things that most people will do that will improve the situation, the aggregate. And then, obviously getting to, if you have a Dan Buettner's way, we're all going to eat beans.
Well, Dan, this is about healthy lifestyle, and it's not about just the intake. Obviously, you just said it here that there's a pro-social element. They've got people who care about you, who protect you, who are with you, as you said, on your worst days. But I really believe, and I know you know this, that animals are part of that pro-social experience, that your pets, these goats, these sheep who are named, that is a social interaction that makes you smile. It makes you feel good. And I just have to believe that it's health promoting. And I've seen it. I wrote a book about it called The Bond. And I just know that animals are part of that pro-social experience.
One of the, in our at Blue Zone cities, we've had over 7 million people in our programs. One of the specific prescriptives we suggest, because we're about changing the environment, is to adopt a dog, ideally a rescue. We know that dog owners have about 20% lower BMI, and lower rates of heart disease. And, it might be because, the dog has to get walked every day, and therefore, guess who else gets walked every day? The human. But also researchers showed that just petting a dog lowers cortisol levels, the stress hormone that occasions inflammation. So you're absolutely right that, looking at animals as the pro-social creatures who can do us a lot of good and vice versa, is not a bad idea.
But I like the idea of people loving the chickens and the sheep and the goats and being connected with them emotionally. It's important for them. I'm sure it's important for a lot of us. Farming, as an ages old tradition, that bond, that husbandry, that very notion of husbandry is embedded in our vocabulary.
Until about 1980 in Sardinia, animals actually lived on the first floor and the humans lived on the second floor. So they shared a home, the farm animals. So yes, they were literally an extension of the family.
I'm quite sure my dog is taking years off my life, Dan. It's not always the case that a dog will relieve stress. But thank you for that. And what have we not asked, Dan, that you would like us to know about your book, about your work? Where can people follow you? When's the book on sale?
The book's on sale now on Amazon. It's called The Blue Zone's American Kitchen. I'm a writer for National Geographic. I'm not a cookbook writer. So the book is equal parts science writing. I describe the diet of other standard American, lost diet of longevity, as I call it, in the front. I believe we have the best photographer from National Geographic, David McLean. So there's several hundred beautiful photographs. And then we called through hundreds of recipes to get 100 recipes that are quick, tasty, and cheap. And it's a great gift. I think it'll be out in time for Christmas. And if people have any questions for me personally, I'm really good at answering direct messages on Instagram. And my handle is @Dan or you can reach me on my website, danbuettner.com. And I love
Buettner's Buettner. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay. Dan, you've inspired me. I'm going to screw my ex-wife out of her Christmas gift. I'm going to keep your book and I'm going to try some of the recipes. So
we'll send you another one. We want you and your ex-wife to live a long time. Just one last story before we leave. So I got to hike with Wayne for a week in Slovenia, and we went through a gate and there were 3 cows sort of just hanging out, and there were, I don't know, 8 or 10 of us, and one cow sensed Wayne and followed him for about 100 yards, wouldn't let him go. It was like, it was in total love. So it was like the animal recognized their biggest advocate. And you remember that way. Wayne's blushing because I'm right.
Well, I told my wife, I said, this is how it's done, Lisa. Come on. Show me.
You're going to get nudged out of the way.
Yeah. I just do believe that animals do have intuition about these sorts of things. And I just think they're so much smarter than we give them credit for. And that was a fun hike. And, that country struck me, Dan, as a Blue Zone's high-level performer, because people were tending to their very modest homes. They were outside, they were walking around. There's a lot of gardening. They're clearly eating a lot of whole foods. And they didn't seem overly stressed. They were lean people in terms of their body mass, and really struck me as a very livable country, and the communities within it were very livable.
I had the same feeling.
Dan, thank you. You're in demand right now. I know this is a busy time with the release of the book. Our show notes will have all the information I mentioned, but we're just really grateful for you and appreciate the commonality we have to the extent that you're helping people, we're helping animals, and you've identified a very nice area where those two overlap. So thank you again. And thank you so much to our listeners for listening to the Animal Wellness Podcast. Be sure to visit animalwellnessaction.org for all of our news and information and to sign up for our news alerts. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and we invite you to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, or Spotify. I've been your host, Joseph Grove, and we'll be back soon with another episode of the Animal Wellness Podcast.